Hello there around the world to viewers and fans of Formula One. Thanks for joining me on this live stream. And if you're preparing to go away quickly and maybe come back, don't worry. Or if you've got friends who are perhaps joining us a bit later on, don't worry as well. Repeat the questions as many times as you want. And because I know nobody's going to stick around for 2 hours. It's hopefully what I'm going to be sticking around for. But welcome to this live stream on the Thursday before the Spanish Grand Prix at Barcelona, where the country is heaving really at the prospect of Fernando Alonso perhaps parlaying a P2 into a win in the Aston Martin. It's possible. Enough really good corners now around Barcelona, particularly with that last corner being really quick for Fernando to be mega. Having said that, Aston Martin would probably say, well, we quite like the tight bits. Actually, it would have suited our car a bit better. That corner's tailor-made for Red Bull, but you never know. So we'll see what you guys think about that. Questions, comments. We've got quite a lot coming through already. Sorry for the slight delay on this. It's because it's an annoying thing. I've got some, as I mentioned earlier, well, I mentioned in the description, I want to do a little bit more about comparing the styles of the drivers. And I brought an image of the two Ferrari drivers into my editing platform. But there seemed to be absolutely no way, even though I've sort of done it 3 times and rebooted the thing 3 times, to get the audio to work over the image. So it's a very frustrating thing. And what I'm going to have to do is just... it's going to go quiet when you look at the image, and I'll describe what you're going to see in the image. You're still going to have a look at the image, that's the plan, but it's just a very annoying thing. But anyway, we'll get on to that, and we'll get on to questions, and then I'll talk a little bit about that. Actually, I'm going to talk about Ferrari now at Monaco, if I may, before we all get swamped with the Spanish Grand Prix and what's going on in Barcelona, because I made a comment then. I'm just going to check all the settings actually before we go any further, because I've been playing around with everything so much. It seems to be, audio seems to be good. Picture seems to be okay. Yeah. Famous last words. Where are we? YouTube. Here we are. Yeah, I made the comment after the race that I was a bit disappointed that they weren't more adventurous with Charles' strategy at Monaco. And I did that video long before Ferrari came out, before anybody already interviewed the drivers or even came out with quotes. And later on, much later on that evening, Ferrari, in fact, I think it was the next morning actually, Ferrari came out with their thing. And there's a, Charles Leclerc quote saying, oh, we've had a bit of stick about our strategy, but I got no complaints about the strategy at all. People are saying that, perhaps we should have gone to the intermediates earlier, but in reality, we were just perhaps waiting to see if there was going to be a safety car and we could have benefited from that. Otherwise, we were just totally messed up by the three-place grid penalty as a result of the impeding of Lando Norris. So in other words, their concept of being aggressive on strategy, bear with me here because it comes to an ending. Their concept of being aggressive would have been to have stayed out to have gone to intermediates at a different time, and a lap sooner, a lap later. That's what their discussion is about, which completely, in my view, misses the point of the real strategy that Ferrari should have adopted, as I said on the Sunday night, which is that if both the medium and the hard were quite capable of going 55 laps in the hands of Max Verstappen and Fernando Alonso, why wouldn't Ferrari, before the start of the race, when every team, including Ferrari, knew there was a very, very good chance that it was going to be wet in the last 3/4 of the race, the last 15, 20 laps or so, everybody knew that. Why wouldn't they say, well, Charles got a 3-place grid penalty. He's absolutely for sure going to be tangled up in traffic. No matter what he's doing, he's going to be below his real race pace because he's going to be in traffic. What we need to do is capitalize on the one thing that we can get out of Charles, which is his ability on slicks in the semi-wet. So above all, we're just going to run him right up until potential rain. We're going to run with the hard or the medium, preferably the medium because it might be slightly better in the semi-wet, as it proved to be for Max. But the hard wasn't bad either, though. We're going to run him right up to that moment, and then obviously we'll have to bring him into intermediates at some point. And that's the aggressive strategy. To make that, but they didn't do that. They brought him in after 40 laps or something and put on another set of slicks. I mean, that was where they lost their aggression. That's where they lost their imagination. That's where they lost their ability to get the best from a driver like Charles Leclerc when he's in the middle of the sludge, having got a 3-place grid penalty, and he hasn't qualified brilliantly anyway. That's how you make up for it, particularly if you know you've got this gift of rain coming at the end of the race, instead of which they did this really boring strategy of dry tire. Oh, it's raining. Oh, yeah, well, maybe a lap more on inters. And then, he went around, did the same thing as everybody else. And that to me, and if they're not getting that point, that to me shows there's still, sadly, a major issue with the whole way they think they're racing and think strategy-wise. Because I wouldn't apply that to a Carlos Sainz, but to a Charles Leclerc, you apply that. And you say, right, we've got this amazing driver, and the only thing we can do with him all day, because he's going to be in traffic otherwise on the dries, is try to get him into a situation where he can take advantage of other drivers who might come in either for a second set of dries or come in early on intermediates. That's how we're going to get him up the field. Didn't happen. And, I think for me, that was a great disappointment. Anyway, that was to clarify, and I'm clarifying it now because of what Ferrari said on Monday, which I think was a really missing the point completely in terms of the strategy that they could have adopted. Another 2 more things before I get onto it. Because of the rush and everything, I didn't give any credit at all to Gabriele Mini and to Frederic Vesti, who won the F3 and the F2 races, feature races at Monaco. Both of them really, really good wins. The F3 win, I think about High Tech and Ollie Oakes beating Prema basically around Monaco. It's pretty impressive. So congratulations to Ollie and High Tech as well. And then think about the ironies of the F2 situation where you've got, first of all, you've got Frederic Vesti and Théo Pourchaire having that unbelievable race when Frederic was at Prema and Teo was at ART, Formula 3 at Monza, and Vesti wins it. And they both end up at ART last year in Formula 2, and Théo Pourchaire gets the better of Vesti. And then Vesti goes back to Prema this year. Now it's Prema against ART again. And Vesti wins Monaco, wins it from the pole, wins it really, really well. Not fans, that's the wrong word, but long-term viewers of my channel will know that I first saw Frederic Vesti when he won in the wet in a Formula 3 race at Austria, beating all the Prema guys. Really, really good under pressure. And I've had him on the channel a few times since then because I was just really intrigued to meet this guy and see what he's like. And he's pretty low profile. He doesn't get a lot of press, and everybody, lots of other drivers out there that they talk about a lot. But he's just gone quietly about his work. He's had his ups and downs, didn't get on very well at ART. But now just to do what he did at Monaco, just brilliant, absolutely brilliant in that Prema car. So congratulations to him. Not much time to celebrate or relax because now everybody's at Barcelona thinking of this weekend. So yeah, such is the effect for doubleheader. It's kind of a shame really because Monaco is such a big race to win. I know it's only part of the F1, F3 and F2 championships, carries the same number of points, but it's Monaco. It's different from everything else. And there's not enough time to savour that, I think. It's a bit of a shame. I think that perhaps they should come up with a rule. You can double headers, triple headers, no problem, but you cannot double head, if that's the right word, the Monaco Grand Prix. You've got to have at least a free weekend after that so everybody can relax and enjoy and savour winning in Monaco and actually take advantage of the publicity of winning around Monte Carlo, because it's a big thing for the teams and the drivers to be able to go back to their sponsors and to just generally rejuvenate what they're doing because of Monaco. So there we go. I'm going to start now because I've been procrastinating, haven't I? Joe, Spiker F8. Hey, Peter, what do you think the effect... This is because Joe's at the front of the list. That's why I'm starting with this now. What do you think the effect of the grid will be now the floors of the top cars have been shown? Oh, I see what you mean. Well, I think... I think there'll be a little bit of learning and a little bit of understanding, a bit more perhaps, but you'd be surprised how confused everyone will still be, I think. I don't think it's going to be as cut and dried. Oh, wow, everybody knows what to do now. Let's get on with it. Dexter, what are you eating down there? What's that? Stop that. He's eating one of my cables, I think. Stop that. Okay, yeah, he is. He's eating a cable. USB cable. Sorry about that. Dexter, over here. Come on, over here. Away from the cable. Come on. That's it. Sorry about that. He does like USB cables. He likes golf balls, tennis balls, and USB cables. So yeah, a But it's not only the floor. There's a lot of other stuff as well, isn't there? I was talking to somebody the other day about the Adrian Newey effect. No, he's fine. The Adrian Newey effect. And it's not only the genius of the man and understanding the overall picture, it's also take nothing for granted and leave, it's a terrible cliche, but leave no stone unturned. There's no other way of saying it. Every millimeter of the car must be sculpted to the shape that they want to create. Every crack, every seam, every rivet. Do they still have rivets? I don't know. Every one of them has, and it's that perfection that's part of the package, the Adrian Newey package. We've got a very nice yellow top chat coming up here. Will. Can't actually see a question with it. But Will, thank you very much. I think it's just a really nice yellow thing. Thank you. But if you want to ask a question, Will, very happy to go for it. Victor Rodriguez. Hi, Peter. What makes Max so special driving in rain? Is it because of the way he brakes or the way he uses the engine for braking under those conditions? Never miss a show. Well, it's nothing technical. It's nothing like, he uses engine braking more than others or anything like that. It's purely touch and feel and suppleness and all the other things that he does so fundamentally well. He's basically Max, as it is with all the great drivers, not just Max. And I think this would apply to, I would say, Leclerc and still Lewis, I think, just. I think he's got this ability to feel the car square on the road. Even if he's got a lot of negative camber on the front, he still feels all four corners of the car. So he's always trying to get load out of the car when he's braking or accelerating, for that matter. And so that just happens naturally, and that's a natural instinct and feel that he has, just feeling those four corners on the road, and therefore keeping everything as stable as you can possibly keep it, given the bumps and the radii of various corners of various circuits around the world. And if you're doing all that very well, you're going to be quick in the wet, absolutely, for sure. There's another thing, which is feeling the surface of the road, which you can do much more if you've got this lovely stable platform. And feeling the surface of the road becomes very, what's the word? It's not important. It becomes the thing in the wet, because the only thing that the wet does is takes the grip level away, that reduces the grip level. And so he's got this thing of feeling the surface of the road, and that manifests itself in frequently going off the traditional, what you would call the traditional racing line, and feeling grip on the outside of the corner, maybe where the marbles are, which actually in the wet is slightly quicker than being where the oil is, for example, or the rubber. So that's a feel that also he has through the pores of his skin and through his nerve endings, that he's just feeling all the time where that grip level is. So it is nothing to do with how he manipulates all the mechanical devices on the car. It's all to do with touch and feel. And other drivers have been that good and are that good in the wet, but you can't be that good in the wet unless you have all those fundamentals to be absolutely in line, which they are. And I showed that picture in the it wasn't that well done. I did it in a real rush. I showed that picture comparing Max with Perez going into Rascasse in the dry, and it's a very important part of the circuit, actually, because it shows up a driver's ability to create a platform when he's going through a left-hander and having to brake hard, a quick left-hander, having to brake hard for this tight right of Rascasse. So he's, regardless of what you do, you've got load on the car when you're braking. So it's the drivers that find that as near as possible, a little sort of square, flattish area where they can get that braking done and get the car to do what they want it to do, that are going to be superior over the drivers who are right on the edge and then kind of, brake as late as possible and then scrabble around the car. I remember Eddie Irvine had a massive shunt going through the left-hander as he was hitting the brakes for Rascasse. Not the right-hand part of Rascasse, the left-hand sweeper before it, where they are starting to hit the brakes. And he basically went on with the Rascasse restaurant. I think he was driving for Jaguar. And I think I'm correct that it was there. And he had this big shunt. And it just shows, that left-hander, it's a really, really difficult part of of Monaco, of any circuit. It's very similar. It's the reverse of almost of turn 9-10 of Bahrain. So it's a great corner, great section of road. And there you saw Max, or by the time he got to the entry point, if you like, of Rascasse, his car is flat. He's got a short corner. He's sort of half a car's width inside Sergio Perez. He's already feeling where his rotation point is for a straight line exit, whereas Perez is coming in, and you can just see he's braked as late as he can with load on the car. Then the car's basically flicked the other way, and he's just looking at the second part of Rascasse, the second apex, if you like, is his only apex, and he's looking at that so he can get the power on and power out of there. All of which looks great on TV probably, but if you get it right. But isn't the quickest way around then? Absolutely no way. And that's where Max got that. That's where he got that pole on that third sector right there. I'm convinced of that. As I say, it wasn't the swimming pool because there's no reward after the quick S going into the pool. And there's no way Max is going to be that much quicker than the very best quick guys through there anyway on a new set of soft tyres, or newish set of soft tyres. So it was that. And anyway, that's why Max is so good in the wet. And I think that's why Fernando struggled a bit in the wet. I mean, it was interesting when they were both still on slicks, how much quicker Max was. And bear in mind how difficult it is when you're leading the race to know how quickly to go on slicks when it's starting to rain. Think about it. It's an incredibly difficult thing that a racing driver has to do, because he needs to be as quick really as the guy in P2, if not quicker, but he doesn't know what that is. He doesn't know what the pace is. It's all to do with feel. And there was one, I think the first lap when it was a bit greasy, Max was something like 4 seconds a lap quicker than Fernando, and Fernando then got it together. But I mean, that just showed, I think, how quickly, how immediate Max's feel is for the surface of the road. It was just amazing to watch, and that was a beautiful lap to watch, that one of Max's on slicks in the semi-wet. And Fernando, just longer corners, and he likes the back end to be a little bit loose, so that when he does his flick, he can just feel that car. He does the initial input with the steering. He likes to just feel the rear go, and that's how he drives the corner, and he drives it beautifully. You very rarely see him out of line. He's manipulating the car as well as any racing driver in the history of the sport, no doubt about that. But to do that, he has to do something quite awkward, which is that initial input of steering, which is a little bit aggressive compared with Max's, and he likes to feel the back end just out. So that's the attitude he needs to go. Again, you could say, wow, isn't that cool? Isn't that great? That looks more spectacular than anything Max ever does. Probably is, but it's not as quick. And it does mean that he's any chance he has to drive with the short corners of Max, to come in early and do a rotation at exactly the right moment and get a lovely linear exit. Any of that is very, very difficult for Fernando to do with the way he likes to drive. Very difficult, impossible. Which is why you saw I did a comparison with Fernando, didn't I? And you could see Fernando's way out on the left, almost in Perez territory, with a lot of lock on the car, asking a lot from the car at that point, whereas Max is sort of at least half a car's width inside him. Actually, I think it's a good moment now to bring in the picture of Perez and Leclerc, because where I go back to here, because I didn't show that, and this is the one I've got a problem with, because the audio goes when I show it on the screen. So I'm going to tell you what you're going to see. I saw, it's got a caption under each, so you can see who they are. I saw Sainz on that place where I was watching for about 10 minutes before I saw Leclerc, and I was really impressed. Actually, I thought, wow, he's he looks really good, and the corner looks pretty short. And then Charles came out, and you saw how short Charles' corners are compared with those of Carlos Sainz. So I'm just going to put that picture on now, and it'll go silent. Just look at it for a couple of seconds, and you'll see what I mean by where Charles Leclerc has his car positioned going into Rascasse and where Carlos Sainz has it. Now, that may not look like a massive difference, but it is. At the speed they're going, and what they're doing with the car, and the platform they need in order to do what they need with the car, that is a big difference. It's a big difference between Charles and Carlos. I'm gonna, when I get the audio sorted, I'll do another set of videos, straight live streams on all of these. So another yellow one come up, I think. Something like that. David Earthling, thank you very much, David. Very kind. Peter, your analysis has enhanced my Formula One fan experience immeasurably. Thank you very much. Question: Merc upgrades seem effective. Podium in Barcelona possible? Yeah, absolutely. Sad thing is, David, I think you could have said Merc podium possible even with the 14A. That's the slightly dubious point here. I mean, what are we relating the upgrades on the Mercedes to? The previous rendition of the Mercedes, or where they are relative to their opposition right now? I think, you know, we saw Alpine looking pretty good alongside Mercedes in Monaco. I don't think they'll look, it's only just my prediction, I don't think they'll look quite as good at Barcelona, purely because I don't think the Renault engine powertrain is as strong as that of Mercedes. And I think that'll show up much more in Barcelona than it would have at Monaco, which is one of the circuits that really, as I said throughout the videos, nullifies a powertrain disadvantage. So I think, you know, there's one team that Mercedes should beat. They should beat them pretty comprehensively, I would have thought. They should be able to beat Alpine. Mercedes, Ferrari, yeah, I think they'll be ahead of Ferrari at Barcelona. I'll be surprised if they aren't with that car now. And that means, yeah, you're potentially looking at a podium, bearing in mind, you know, both Red Bull drivers should be on the podium, and so it leaves one slot, doesn't it really? And it could be a Leclerc, it could be a Max or a George or a Carlos in home ground as well. And then there's the Fernando Alonso Aston Martin thing. So, you know, it's not going to be easy. I think the big question we should all ask ourselves is, will Mercedes beat Fernando Alonso's Aston Martin in Barcelona? That's a big question, isn't it? And probably they won't, because purely because the Aston will be better balanced. Fernando's never been more confident in his life, I don't think. No, that's not true. I think in his first couple of years at Renault, he was just as confident on Michelin tyres. And but that'll be the race, you know, between Aston Martin and Mercedes to see where they are. But thanks for that question, David. Just going on about the Aston Martin, we had a question in the last live stream as he grabs a weird coloured drink, but just what the doctor ordered, as it were. We had a question last one about Lance Stroll, you know, how long can he be around, and, you know, he's got to be replaced and all the rest of it. I think it'll be interesting, actually, to see what happens now, because you can imagine Lawrence Stroll saying, okay, enough's enough. What's going on with my son? I know how good he is. I know he could beat Sebastian Vettel on a good day. What's going on with this? Blah, blah, blah. And I'll tell you what's going on, because Lance Stroll, actually, even if you're not a fan, I think you would concede that he doesn't look as good this year as he has looked in previous years, when we've seen him do some quite amazing things, in the wet particularly. And you've seen him take it to some pretty good racing drivers. But with Fernando, he's getting swamped. And what I think is going on is exactly what I was just talking about. I think Fernando's found in this car a car where he's got a brilliant front end, and he's got it set up so that with the steering flick that he loves to give it, the back end just goes out a little bit, and then he can do his Fernando Alonso thing in every corner, fast and slow. And I think that Stroll actually is a much more refined, no, it's the wrong word. I think he's a shorter corner driver than Fernando Alonso. And I think I don't think he's very good when he's got any sort of oversteer or looseness at the rear, the sort of thing that Fernando's building into the car. And I think you may find Barcelona as a moment where Aston Martin can take a deep breath. This is only my opinion, but they're taking a deep breath. They're going to say, okay, we need to get Lance up there now. And we're going to do that by taking out some front end, making it a bit more understeery. And I say that because this team has effectively been midfield for I don't know how many years. I know they won a Grand Prix in in the Racing Point days, and they nearly won a Grand Prix in the Force India days. But yeah, I mean, they're there or thereabouts now, aren't they? And I think they've just got used to the fact that for the first time they can set up a car by actually taking some grip away from it, because they've never been in that position before. It's always been, how can we add more grip at the front or more grip at the rear? And now they're actually in a position now to take some grip out of the front to give Stroll, perhaps, I'm only guessing, but a bit of understeer, which is probably what he wants, to tighten up the rear. And I'm guessing he might actually, if they do that, I'm guessing he might go quite well around Barcelona. It's only, watch this space, I guess. But that. I can't imagine that they wouldn't be putting quite a lot of effort now into trying to get Stroll up to speed, because his dad will be cracking the whip like crazy. And, you don't want Stroll. And Stroll's making mistakes, more mistakes now under pressure. Like Monaco's a good example. He was quite quick in Q1, and then he had a drama with a weighbridge or something, and then no time, and then he lost 0.3 or something at Rascasse in sector 2, and that in Q2, and so that's a bit un-Stroll-like as well. So I don't, I'm not going to say I don't. He probably doesn't have that many fans. Although I was down at the airport here the other day, and there was a young lad wearing a Lance Stroll Aston Martin T-shirt. So I thought, I wonder whether he's just been given that or what. I said, are you a Lance Stroll fan? The Spanish guy said, yeah, I love Lance Stroll. Okay, good. So RMDS KDVL is the next comment. Hi Peter, what do you think about Lando being alongside Max in coming seasons at Red Bull? Will Lando be able to challenge or even beat Max at some point? Have a nice day. Love your live show. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think, well, I don't know. I'm sure Lando doesn't see himself as a Max wingman. I'm sure at this stage of his career he thinks, I'd love to drive for Red Bull, and probably doesn't think any more than that, just thinks how brilliant it would be to be in a mega car and to just enjoy being in a Red Bull. But then the trouble would start, because how's he going to beat Max Verstappen? And then what does Lando Norris become? Does he become just a really good number 2 or what? So I think, that's a possibility. Sorry, one of those lights went out. I don't know why. I think there's half a chance he might go to Alpine. Is there not? I think he's on another year, so it's a bit of a wait. But Alpine are not going badly. There seems to be a lot of muscle behind that team. I'm only saying that because I'm trying to think of what places there might actually be for Lando. And wouldn't that be an interesting swap, if he went to Alpine? But Alpine looking pretty tight now, pretty good team, good-looking team. And I'll show these in a later one, but I also did a comparison between Ocon and Gasly into Rascasse. Very, very similar. Both really good. Short corners, really impressive, actually. Ocon I was going on about, but Pierre wasn't far behind. Seems to make a few more. Does he make more mistakes, or just more happens to Pierre? I don't know what it is. I see he's still doing all that ball juggling stuff on the grid. I still think he needs to stop that, and that might soften his day a bit and give him a bit more room to maneuver. But going back to Lando, I think, I did a comparison with him, which I'll also show in a subsequent vid. I think he and Piastri's a little bit earlier than Lando. Not a lot, but Lando's really wide into Rascasse. And I'm not saying, and it's not just the wide line, it's the long corner, and that is how he's manipulating the car. And I don't know, I keep saying it's tough times for Lando Norris right now at McLaren. Speaking of McLaren, good to hear Rob Marshall is going there. Very good, dependable pair of hands. He's been at Red Bull for a long, long time, since the Adrian Newey era. In fact, I think I'm correct in saying that Rob was the first guy, and I think he was at Benetton, I may be wrong. He was the first guy that Adrian Newey hired when he went to Red Bull, was Rob Marshall, to work under him, basically. And so he's been there throughout the Adrian era. So he knows how to run a race team from a technical point of view. And that's a good call by McLaren, I think, to get Rob Marshall. Because Rob had got as far as he was going to go at Red Bull, I'm sure. And now this is a really nice position for him at McLaren. So good. Congratulations to Rob Marshall. Lovely guy too. And good to see him doing that. I think. I'm just thinking now. I think I'm just trying to go back in time, but I think he was also one of the first guys Ross Brawn hired at Benetton. I think he was one of the key guys there as well. I think he was very, very highly thought of by very good people. So I like Rob, a good bloke, really good bloke. How do we get onto that? Oh yeah, Lando, McLaren, Rob Marshall. So yeah, Lando. I've had a few phone calls recently from people who don't seem to be massive Lando Norris fans. In fact, they seem to be the other way. They're all Oscar Piastri fans, and I'm got nothing against Piastri. I think he drives really well, apart from the way they handled that whole Renault thing, Renault thing. But the one thing that disappoints me about Lando is that his corners are still quite long, and I think that's going to be a handicap the more his career develops. He's a more rounded driver, more supple driver than Carlos Sainz, but he's not a lot different in the way he approaches corners and the way he actually drives through corners. It's just that he does it a bit softer, and he needs to. That's the one been saying that for about 2 years now. I think I'm amazed. Not that he listens to what I say, but I'm amazed that nobody at McLaren has sort of mentioned that at this point and said, you need to start different trajectory there, Lando, and start working on different rotation points. Anyway, Karma in Babylon. I always love that one. Hi, Peter. Hi, PW. Nelson Piquet is a 3-time champion, but is never really talked about as much as other champions. Any thoughts and why? And which era of Formula One are you most fond of? Well, in recent times, Nelson's name is sort of verboten because of his descriptive use of words that were inappropriate, obviously, in talking about Lewis. And so the whole Formula One world has gone quiet on Nelson Piquet as a result. Prior to that, I think you're right. I don't think he's ever thought of. It's a bit like David Coulthard in a way. When you think about Grand Prix winners, aggressive Grand Prix winners who, drove brilliant races, as he did in the French Grand Prix, 2000 was it? When he beat Michael wheel to wheel. You talk about Jochen Rindt or Ronnie Peterson or Ayrton Senna, but you never think about David Coulthard. But anyway, going back to Nelson, it's a bit the same with him with world champions. I think, dare I say it, maybe it's from my position of where I saw all that at the time and where I still see it, therefore, is that all his championships were a bit dodgy, if that's the right word. They're all they're all driving, well, certainly the last one wasn't, because it was Williams and everything was right, but Nigel blew him away. And if it wasn't for a couple of ridiculous things like Nigel's exhaust manifold cracking whilst leading the Monaco Grand Prix from the pole, tiny little piece of metal, Nigel would have been world champion in 87, and deservedly so. But Nelson was. So, but going back to his Brabham World Championships, 81 and 83, they were, the 81 championship was, I think, tarnished in two ways. One, the South African Grand Prix lost its points after it had been held and run as a championship round. Despite what it says in Wikipedia these days, that it was only a round of Bernie's new championship, it was actually at the start of that race, Bernie shook hands with Carlos Reutemann and told it was a round of the FIA Formula One World Championship. Shake hands, yes. And Carlos won that race, 9 points. Piquet was second, 6 points. Piquet eventually won the championship by 1 point. So there was that. And secondly, then it was pretty obvious that Brabham was underweight in a lot of places in qualifying. And now, there's quite a lot of Brabham people talk about it being underweight and confirm that it was. I think that's tarnished it as well. It was a dodgy thing, and there was always that. It was a time of rules coming in, and then usually Gordon Murray coming up with a very, very clever response. Some of the responses of which was sometimes right on the edge of what you could take. So I think there's a little bit of that as well. And yeah, I think that's it really. I knew Nelson when he was in Formula 3, working with Pee Wee, Greg Siddle, with the Rault, and they were just very, very good, very switched on in terms of preparing the car and how quick it was. I think they were one of the first to realize how important friction was and the bearings, and when you push a car in the pit lane, how easy it was to push it. if you see what I mean. And they were one of the first to get onto that. And they're just very clever. That's all good stuff, and that should actually stand up with him and make him the professor like Alan Prost. I agree. But I think these other things, and being so associated with Bernie for so long, when Bernie, you know, we now know Bernie was pretty dodgy, wasn't he, in terms of a lot of the stuff they did. I think it's that. But in recent times, it's more the whole, you know, what he's been saying, what he said about Lewis, and how that came over in English has really hurt against him in terms of people, what they think about Nelson. In terms of my favourite era, well, I've always said my favourite year, not that I was around to watch it, was 1965. I just love the circuits, the cars, the proportion of the cars to the drivers' helmets, to the circuits, the way they look, the 1.5 litre Formula One cars. As far as I can remember, nobody was killed in Formula One in 65. It was a very safe year because the cars were in balance with the circuits. It all changed in 66 when we went to the 3 litre formula. And I just love Lotus 33Bs and BRMs, 65 BRMs and 65 Ferraris and 65 Brabhams. I think they were just the most beautiful racing cars. So if I had to, if you said, right, what is it, teletransport or whatever Jack talks about, some, you know, way you can go back in time or ahead in time, teleport. I'd go to 65. I'd just love to spend the whole of the 1965 season watching Formula One. A friend of his, Dexter's coming again. That's why I'm looking down. I think he's USB cable free now. A friend of mine recently sent me a sort of a 1.5 hour replay film of American TV's coverage of the 65 Mexican Grand Prix. Unbelievable. It's so cool. I just love it. It's very, very, you know, juddery and black and whitey. Very like the old DVDs I sometimes watch of a program called Adventures in Paradise, which I think came out in the very early 60s. Gardner McKay, Adventures in Paradise. It was really good. I love that program. I remember the music for it when I was a kid, not old enough actually to watch the programs and see what they're not understanding what they're all about. But I remember the music of the yeah, something like that. Anyway, I won't go on. Not very good. I'll get it as this show goes on. I'll remember the really nice bit of music. Okay, next one. Rick as one. Hi Peter, what do you think about G. Russell's request to the team for Lewis to be allowed him to pass in order to prevent a fast approaching Charles and also allow him to catch Ocon overstepping? Well, I mean, I love that because I think George is always doing it. He's always pushing the envelope, isn't he? He's always going for every single thing, and he's a bit like Jordan Spieth. He's just constantly talking about what's going on, and you don't need any commentary. All you need to do is listen to George on the radio, and that's enough. And yeah, he's always going to do that. He's a race driver, and he's always going to push. But there's no way in the world they were going to do anything, I don't think. And you know, I think, I mean, I've said all along, Lewis is not comfortable with George Russell there. He's too pushy. He's too quick. He's too aggressive. He's too everything. And that's why you see him sidling up to Valtteri Bottas on the drivers' parade and hanging out with Valtteri, bring back the old days. And, you know, Valtteri was none of those things. And then George is doing what, George Russell was always going to do. And that's what Toto Wolff hired him to do, I guess. And I've always said, if you got Lewis, you don't really need George. I'll probably say the same thing now, vice versa. But that's where they're at. And that George is not going to stop doing that. So that's what I think about it. I hope it happens more because I want to see how Mercedes are really going to handle it when they've got a race-winning car and a championship in front of them, and they got George Russell taking it to Lewis every race, or Lewis trying to take it back from George at every race, whichever you want to put it at. But I think let's think about George. He will always think of a scenario to justify wanting to put a bit of pressure on Lewis in a nice way. He's good. I like him for that. That's what race drivers do. It's about Fernando at the moment, isn't it? He's being ridiculously over the top about trying to help Lance Stroll. partly because Lance is struggling and partly because he knows it's good for his currency with Lance's old man. You can read it a mile away, but then, there's Fernando trying to be the perfect teammate to help Lance along. Yeah, right. You wait. The day Lance Stroll, if it happens, out-qualifies Fernando Alonso. You see how nice Fernando is about Lance on that day. Dennis Y. Hey, Peter, looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Well, thanks, Dennis. A few thoughts already. Powerled 111. Jerry Birrell, Roger Williamson, Tony Bryce, Tom Price, Gunnar Nilsson. Superb generation of drivers of the 70s we lost. Have you any special memories of these or others? Well, Jerry Birrell, I never got to meet Jerry. I was always a fan. He was quick, and I liked that whole Coca-Cola Formula 3 thing with James Hunt. I used to read about that in Motoring News when I was in Australia, but I thought, wow, that's pretty good, isn't it? Coca-Cola, what a huge thing. Now I know it was all to do with John Hogan and his ad agency, and that's how Ron Dennis met John Hogan, would you believe? And then John Hogan effectively helped Ron take over McLaren. He became the Marlboro man and changed the face of Formula One. So it all started back in the Jerry Birrell Coca-Cola days. And Ron Dennis today will tell you that, that they were all big fans of Jerry Birrell. And of course, John Hogan was as well. Roger Williamson, knew Roger. Saw him drive in Formula 3. He was really impressive. He was, how did he drive? I wasn't well informed enough to know what I was really looking at, but to me, he looked like, a Niki Lauda looked in Formula 2. He was just quick and aggressive and right there, consistent, very consistent. Just, it was obvious this guy was going to be a Grand Prix winner. And I was at Zandvoort in '73 when he had that accident, and it was just terrible, absolutely terrible. It was only my second year in Formula One, and already we'd lost drivers. It was numbing, and the feeling of going back to England, the travelling on the Sunday night after a driver has passed away is just the most terrible thing. And a lot of the current generation, I think, probably there for Senna and Roland, but Roger Zandvoort was just horrific. Tony Bryce, that was a terrible shock. I knew Tony very well too. Lovely guy, very laid back, tall, bit gangly, very, very easy to talk to, very relaxed, always a smile on his face. I wouldn't say he was an angel in the sense that he was an incredibly hard and fast racing driver. Very, very good. I mean, Bryce versus Williamson, it'd be difficult to pick for me between those two. And Tony Bryce, lost him in that terrible plane crash at Graham Hill, Tony Alcock and others, and of the Hill MC team. And when that news broke, it was in the middle of winter, it was cold, it was BBC News on the morning, and the season was over, and just to hear that accident news on the radio, something I'll never forget. Tom Price, he's the one of all of those, he's the one I knew best, and got to know him when he was racing the Royale F3 car, and he was incredibly quick, but sideways everywhere. I mean, he brought new dimension to the word oversteer. Everything was just unbelievable opposite lock slides and car control. And he got away with it all the time. It's just, there was Jean-Pierre Jarier was his teammate at Shadow, and he was pretty much an opposite lock expert. And Tom just took it another 30% level to another 30% higher. This ability to hold a car on a slide in the days when you could hold a car on a slide and not destroy the rear tires. And Tom Price was softly spoken, shy, got on very well with him. And I spent a few dinners with him, went to his house near Brands to interview him once. And I was always a fan. And when we lost him, I was on the flight back that night after the South African Grand Prix, South African Airways 747, flying into a thunderstorm. And Tom was in the hold, and Nella, his wife, was the row in front of me. And it was the most miserable time. And I think when I think about the worst tragedies of my career in Formula One, that Tom's is definitely right at the front. And I went to the funeral in Otford. I remember James Hunt wore a suit and tie, and the opening hymn, and I've still got the hymn sheet, was "Morning Has Broken," Cat Stevens. And whenever I hear that song, I always think of Tom. Gunnar Nilsson, yeah, lovely guy too. Visited him in hospital and knew him when he's in Formula Atlantic and right up to Formula One. Always laughing. I mean, no surprise that he and Mario got on so well at Lotus. He was very, very quick. We had Ronnie. How good was Gunnar? That was the thing, and he wasn't far behind Ronnie. He was potentially going to be right up there with Ronnie, and he is certainly capable of winning more than just the one Grand Prix. And he, what a terrible thing. And when it happened, his cancer, Formula One got together. Jackie Oliver was really good at putting all this together. I got to give a lot of credit to him, the Gunnar Nilsson campaign. He was one of Gunnar's best friends, and we all did that big run at Hyde Park in Gunnar Nilsson cancer treatment campaign, and raised a lot of money, and a lot of celebs turned up. Remember Leslie Ann Down was there. She was big in downstairs at the time. Yeah, everyone. It was really good, and Gunnar was. Funnily enough, I was just looking at a picture I had today. When I've been spending a lot of time just going through all my books in storage, bringing them into the home here, and still haven't got them all here, but getting there. And I came across a picture I've been given, I guess 77, from John Player, Team Lotus, and it's a drawing of Mario, drawing of Gunnar, both signed by the two drivers. And I was just looking at Gunnar's smiling face and thinking, life is so unfair. So yeah, superb generation of drivers, as you say, and it was just a terrible time. By the time I was 30, I'd been to 15 funerals. Everybody has their own stories to tell, but most of those funerals were for young drivers about my age, and it was I don't know. When I look back now, I just think they just did it. We just thought, put the Bellstar helmet on, put the seat belts on, put the oxygen air supply in, put the gauntlet gloves on, the flame-proof overalls. We're okay. We're taking all the safety precautions we can, and we need to. And nobody really thought beyond that. No, you can't say the drivers didn't think about safety, because they did. They had all the safety stuff, so far as they knew about it at the time. But, that's why these days, whenever... For example, quite recently, there's been quite a lot of chat about the red, overuse of the red flag. And I immediately said, look, I don't care how many times I put the red flag out. If there's even 1% cause that comes under the heading of safety, I'd like to see a red flag, thanks. Because for me, I've been through enough, and racing can never be safe enough for me because of where I come from, really, and those guys that we've just been talking about. Michael Delosso. What will Lawrence Stroll do about Lance? Well, there's the question, you see. Is this status quo his best compromise between dad and winning? Well, I think, Michael, sorry, please, the answer, I've just been talking about Lance and how I think you may see Aston doing something about this, because I can't imagine that Lawrence is going to let it go on for too much longer. And my theory, and I repeat, it's only a theory, is that they're going to change Stroll's setup and see how he goes with a bit more, with less going on at the rear of the car, which Fernando loves, but Lance doesn't. And I don't think he does. I've never seen him drive that way. So, and to me, it's interesting that the minute Alonso arrived, even though the car is a lot better than it was last year, Stroll's gone off the boil, and that can only be something to do with the way Fernando's got that car set up. That was my line of reasoning. So I think let's wait and see in the next race or two. Obviously they're thinking it's Canadian Grand Prix coming up soon, so we better get our act together with Lawrence. This is the Aston Martin guys thinking about their boss. We better put on a good show in Canada, and we better start getting our act together here in Spain. because Fernando will be okay. It's his home race. He's not going to be slow in Barcelona, regardless of what we do. Michael Del Oso. Oh, that's the one. Juan Usher. Juan Usher? Ussher. I got the one bit right, I think, anyway. Hi, Peter. Given your relationship with Reutemann and Lopez, do you think there is a chance of an Argentine star? What would need to happen? Are distances and economics just too great an obstacle? Yeah, obviously friendship and massive respect for Carlos Reutemann for many years. Jose Maria Lopez, massive respect as well. I tried to do my best to get him into Formula One. I felt he would have gone very well, but it didn't happen, sadly. Not because of lack of funding or lack of intention, but because Bernie and Max just changed the rules of Formula One and killed our team, USF1, before we had a chance even of building a car, really. So that was a great disappointment for me, great shame. I think, I was talking to, I wonder if I should mention his name or not. I won't. I'm talking to a young driver who won 6 Formula 2 races, and he's now doing very well in Le Mans and not regretting having to do endurance racing, because at least he knows what he's doing when he gets up in the morning, and at least he's getting paid to drive. So he counts himself quite lucky. But he told me that he was, and in order to keep his identity quiet, I need to not mention the name of the team, but I'll say it was a back of the grid team, and his deal with that team was that he would do all the sim work that they needed and wanted him to do for free, and in return they would give him a test drive. And he did a lot of hours of sim work, didn't get the test drive once, not one test, and then they said to him, but we quite like to race you, but to do that we need 20 million euros. That's why he's doing Le Mans. And that is the problem. In answer to your question about an Argentine star, that is the problem. Formula One teams, there are many teams now, midfield upwards, that won't even take a paying drive. Well, that's not true. Somebody told me, it was after Monaco, and we were chatting on the Sunday night after I'd done the vid, and I was saying, wow, I wonder what Perez will be thinking. No, or he said, and we were talking about Perez anyway, and what he takes or doesn't take away from Monaco. And I said something like, well, the problem is he just hasn't remained what he could have been, which is Max's wingman, and just stayed quiet and done a very good job. He had to start talking about he was going to take the championship to Max, and he's as quick as Max and all the rest of it, and the team need to give him the great car. And he said, yeah, but don't forget one thing. Perez brings a lot of money to that team from Mexico. And this was a guy that knows the industry quite well. I thought, I hadn't thought about that for a while. Does he? Yeah, probably does. So is Perez a paying driver? Would he be in that car if he wasn't bringing money from Mexico? Interesting question. I was going to say, from the midfield upwards, they don't really take paying drivers. And I suddenly thought, what about Perez? But then let's assume, from sort of AlphaTauri downwards, they do look for paying drivers. The going rate is a lot of money. And that's a ridiculous amount of money for anybody to have to spend, apart from Lawrence Stroll and Lance, to go for one season of Formula One in what may not be a very good car. That's the problem. So there are no other, the distance is not a problem. No other problem. It's just the economics, the money. Absolutely the only issue. Maddie Ark. Hi, Peter. Thank you for your insights as always. Get scarbs on these live streams from mid-season review in summer. Yeah, I'll try and do that. I'm still struggling with actually getting a guest on a live stream. It's not as easy as you think. And every time I think, it's got to be quite easy, I have a look at it. And after about an hour of chatting about it with my guys and thinking about it, I think it's all a bit too complicated. I'm just going to record the interview and put it into the live stream. So I'll do that with Scarbs, absolutely for sure. We'll definitely do that mid-season. I'm not sure I'll have it actually live. That's the only thing, because it's playing with fire to do that. And it kind of depends on how good his connection is as well, which is always a big ask for these people, isn't it? Particularly these boffins like Scarbs, This one I think is okay, isn't it? It's not bad. Says here, excellent connection. Not bad for Spain. Jacob S. Hi, Peter. What are your thoughts on the Circuit de Catalunya's removal of the slow speed chicane towards the end of the lap? Thanks for doing these streams. Yeah, I mentioned that before. I think it's a great thing they've got rid of that ridiculous chicane. It was one of the worst chicanes S-bend things I'd ever seen. And I love that last corner. Very, very quick. So I think it's a brilliant thing they've done that. I just can't believe it's like getting rid of speed bumps on a road. I just thought it would never happen. Reverse engineering, wonderful. Can't wait to see the Formula One cars through there. And I can't wait to see what they do through there. Whether it's, I'm sure they're going to be lifting, going down a gear, braking maybe. I don't know. It's going to be a quick corner. Well, until we actually see it, we just don't know. But it is going to be quick. I think it's brilliant. And I think, what do I think? I think there was probably quite a lot of noise and chat about overtaking and DRS, and it's going to be more difficult to be closely behind a car coming onto the pit straight if it's a quick corner. Probably so, but then I prefer to have a quick corner that sorts out the wheat from the chaff than a DRS zone anyway, a DRS zone that works anyway. So that's just me. I love demanding fast corners. That's what Grand Prix racing is all about, I think. Gandalf the Fool. Hey, Peter, hope you're doing great. I am, Gandalf. Thank you very much. Is your question. Peter, what's your view on how small things affect Formula One drivers? I heard recently that Lewis has been complaining his seat is so forward that it affects how he feels the surface and dynamics of the car. Well, I think that I wouldn't call that a small thing, actually. I mean, if that is the case, and I think that we need to have that in context, and I suppose I need to talk to him about that. Why? You look at Alain Prost, René Arnoux, Gilles Villeneuve, Carlos Reutemann, Alan Jones. They all sat in cars with, feet well past the front axle line. No problem at all. And even if he's done 1 million miles in cars with the feet way behind the front axle line, it doesn't mean that he shouldn't be able to adjust very quickly. It's an interesting one. It's an interesting one, as the question of the anti-dive at the front is interesting as well, and whether or not that takes away feel from the driver at initial steering input, particularly. Because that is, in theory, what anti-dive does, and Shub's talked about that as well. And another engineer to whom I spoke reckons that Perez went off at Saint-Avold in Q1 because of the lack of feel he gets through the anti-dive at the front of the car. And maybe that's why he did all that stuff in Melbourne as well, in the semi-wet. But doesn't explain why Max is so good in the car, other than that maybe with the anti-dive, the benefits he gets from the grip level at the front override the lack of so-called sensitivity he gets through the steering because of the anti-dive, because he does so well with what he's got, that package, that very stable aero package that he's got, that blends in incredibly well with the stable platform that he creates for the car. It could be a bit of that sort of Nigel Mansell double whammy Williams 14B, whereby it only really comes into effect once you go beyond the point where it feels as if it's about to break away and cause a massive accident. But if you stay flat on the throttle and you get through the sound barrier, suddenly you're in this world of incredible grip. And it could be that Max is often in that world and Perez isn't. But getting back to Lewis, I don't know. I find that hard to understand, because so many great drivers have changed driving position without any issue at all. Jim Clark being a very good example of that. Started in a Lotus 18, which was pretty upright, basic position with the steering wheel at an angle, and then went to a Lotus 25 when he's virtually flat on his back, and he was super quick in both. And then you got Adrian Newey, back end of, I guess it was mid-90, thinking of, or maybe early back end of 89, next step at Leighton House is to have the front as narrow as he can possibly make it, because that's where his big aero advantage is coming from, to the point where he's going to have the throttle below the brake, one on top of one another, and the left foot operates the brake above the throttle, not alongside it. Didn't happen. I don't think any drivers were ready to take that one on. But that was Adrian thinking, if it's quick, they'll get used to it. And I think that's the case with Lewis, isn't it? I think you'll probably find that if this new Mercedes upgrade makes the car super quick in Barcelona, and he's half a second a lap quicker than Max Verstappen, takes the pole and leads from start to finish, I think you'll find that his comments about not liking the driving position will suddenly disappear completely. But when the car's not good and you're not doing that well, I think a lot of other stuff comes into play in your mind. I'm not saying it's not real, but it wouldn't enter his mind if the car was super quick. That's probably what I think is going on there. Not that I wouldn't take Lewis 100% on what he says about everything. It's just that I need to know the context of what he's really talking about there. Also from Gandalf, also, how exactly do drivers decide which gear they want to be in when cornering? Do they all look at the dashboard and the steering wheel when upshifting or downshifting? No. That happens completely naturally. And it's... if they didn't have the numbers there, they would still be using the paddles exactly the same. So the numbers are there as much as for the telemetry and because it's a logical thing to have. And I suppose at some point, they might be looking for neutral if they have a moment from fourth gear or whatever. But when they're actually driving, all they're doing is feeling, I need another gear now, and going down the gears now. And it's completely natural to them to do that. And that's why you see them changing mid-corner, changing gear up or down or whatever they're doing mid-corner, which Nico Rosberg kind of started doing, I think, better than anybody else. It was one of the things he did really well. And it was the same with manual shifts. It wasn't any different in those days. It was all just, you need a gear, you need the next gear, you don't need the next gear, you're coming down, whatever it was. And in Ayrton's case, you go through every gear rather than jump the gears. So... it's an interesting question, though. It's a very interesting question. And how they work out what gears they're going to have, of course, that is a real engineering thing at the start of the year, because you can't play with the ratios once the season has started. I think you can change them once in the year, and it's it's not a big gamble anymore, because everybody knows exactly the layout of the circuits. They can do simulations, they know the rev range, they know the torque, they know exactly what they need to do. But in the first year of, was it 14, when we had that rule, I think it was a bit of an issue, and some teams were not getting 8th gear at all, and some of them were running 4th when they wanted to be in 3rd, and it was a bit of a drama. But now it's pretty well sorted, to the point where it's not really talked about very much, and they don't use every gear at every circuit, that's for sure. So they've got a wide enough range to get it right. And of course, back in the old days, if that's the right word, it was a big talking about, always the ratios, change the ratios after the first session, need a longer 4th, shorter 5th, whatever it was. And that was always a big thing. And you had these mechanics. Some mechanics were unbelievably good at gearbox ratio changing. I think Roger Hill was sort of king of the heap, Tyrrell, #1 mechanic. Always had the back of the gearbox off, gears everywhere. Jackie's man, really good. Eric Findies. Hello, Mr. Windsor. I very much appreciate your insights. I find that your vids are changing how much I get from and enjoy the races themselves. Well, thank you very much. It's good to hear. And if I don't know what you're really talking about there, but if you're saying that there's a lot more to racing than just overtaking, and it is about driving, and it is about how drivers approach various types of corners and how they do that differently one from another, then that's good, because to me that is what racing is all about, or driving is all about anyway. It's what I love to watch. And I reiterate the point. When I talk about, say, Carlos Sainz in these longer corners and Charles Leclerc with his shorter corners, that needs to be seen in the context still of Carlos Sainz being an unbelievably good driver. We're talking about tiny details here. We're not saying, he's no good. He, even at Carlos Sainz's level, he's superb, and that that I hope that comes through as well. And I sometimes have to say that, because sometimes I probably sound a bit pompous in the way I talk, but I don't mean to be, because these guys are all really good, really, really good. It's just that there are differences, and I love to see those differences and to try to help point them out. As I say, I'll do a better job in another live stream and some other vids with other drivers. I did most of them. I don't think I got a really good comparison between Hulkenberg and Magnussen. nor between Bottas and Zhou. But I think I've got everybody else side by side. So it's going to be quite good when I really get going on that. So another one from Eric says, Sergio has had a tough 2 weeks. Is comparing him to Max just unfair? Just how good is Max historically? And is it just talent or in his work, or is it his work ethic and sim work that makes him so special as a racer? Well, just talking about those two, I've always been very clear in my mind that there is not an area where Perez is better than Max, other than in effectively having slightly better traction control than Max. His right foot is just like electronic traction control. He's really, really good at getting the power down at exactly the right rate against the decreasing lateral load as you're coming out of a corner. When there's a long straight, as we saw in Sector 1 in Baku, that's when you really see that advantage. But I don't think he's got there's no other area where he's better than Max, and most of the areas he's inferior to Max. In fact, I think every other area is inferior to Max, which is why I said what I said at Monaco. There's no way in the world he's ever going to be quicker than Max into Sandervoort. And Sandervoort anyway isn't a corner where you can gain a lot of time by being late on the brakes, because it's slightly off camber. It's usually a bit shady there. The track grip is usually quite low. And that is a corner where he needed to be thinking only of how good he is from mid-corner to exit, and to get the car as stable as possible at the mid-corner. Instead of which he just went in, 10 miles an hour too quickly and just crashed into the barrier in a very unseemly way, which to me can only be explained by Sergio thinking, as a result of his success, particularly in Baku, I think more than anywhere else, that he can beat Max and that he can win this championship, and he's better than Max or as good as Max, providing Red Bull give him a great car. And I think those two facts, I think he probably got some fairly stern words in his ear from Red Bull about suggesting that the car wasn't perfect. And secondly, you're really playing with fire when you start saying, I think I'm as good as Max, I can take the championship to Max. Even if that's what his fans wanted to hear him say, it was a thing that he should not have said, because it was then in his emotional intelligence, and it was there subliminally driving him every time he walked to the track, every time he climbed into the car. And I think that's what happened at Sandervoort. So, absolutely, he's had a tough 2 weeks. The Miami thing was, as I said, that was explainable in Sergio's mind, because he was on a different strategy, and so he could say, I guess, to himself, if not to his people, we were on the wrong strategy. But it didn't really explain why he was so slow on new hards compared with Max, who was on used hards, halfway through the race. And that was a very telling moment, I thought. I know the fuel loads were very different, and the way the hard had come in on Max's car with the temperature was a very different thing, but nonetheless, it was not good. So, that was a tough week as well. Barcelona, hard to see him out-maxing Max at Barcelona. Whereas he's going to be quite good out of... I think Max will have him out of turn 2, which is the chicane, because he's going to be so good at not moving the car and just turning in from the inside of the track and not overloading it going into turn 3, which is a very important corner. Turn 3 is super quick, but then there's a straight afterwards. So turn 3 is a really important corner. And Max is unbelievably good in his preparation for turn 3, the way he comes out of 2. A lot of drivers sort of go back to the left and then across for 3, but Max is just like this. Watch it. You're going to love it. And Charles should be like that too, if he's got his brain in gear. Oops, shouldn't be saying that. But I think Perez he'll be good, but he'll just be a little bit more to the left. He'll be using a little bit more road, asking a little bit more of the car, longer corner. 4 will be, his exit of 4 will be based on what he's how much load he's had going through there, and there's not a lot of difference probably between Max and Perez through 4. I should imagine they'll be very similar through there, but there'll be no way Perez can do anything really special with his traction out of there. The next corner, that left-hander, the tight left-hander down the hill, because it's downhill, it's not, and it's the way the radius of the corner. It's not a very difficult corner for someone like Max to be as good as Perez on traction out of there. The next one, the next left, is that sort of S bend at the bottom of the hill, curbs. That's all Max Verstappen. Change of direction. Turn 9, the right-hander at the top. That's all Max Verstappen. Long straight, high-speed braking. That's all Max Verstappen. Those next corners, they're all medium speed. Slow medium speed, Max Verstappen. And then the last bit, which could have been Perez territory, the traction out of the S's, the tight S's is all gone, and that's a quick corner. That's Max Verstappen territory as well. So I'm not really sure where Max is going to beat. Sorry, I'm not really sure where Perez is going to beat Max around Barcelona. Canada? Let's try and think of Canada. I suppose out of turn 2, the hairpin, the right-hander, maybe. But that turn 2 is very dependent on how you brake for it coming out of turn 1. And you come out of turn 1, the car's quick, it's got load on it, and then you've got to find a lovely little supple, flat, comfortable braking area for 2. And Max will be so good there. His platform for 2 will be so good that he'll be completely perfect and straight mid-corner for his exit out of 2. So I don't see Perez gaining anything out of that. Out of the hairpin, probably. Perez will be good. The last hairpin. Yeah, bring on Hungary, I think, is probably Perez's best chance at the moment. Jacob S. A Formula 2 driver. A number 1 and number 2 driver on a team seem to work best. Max, Fernando seem so comfortable in their current situations. Lewis, Charles, less so. Why do teams media continue to push for 2 number 1 drivers on a team? Ignorance? That's all I can say. I agree with you 100%. If you've got, as I said a million times, if you've got Lewis, you don't need George. You need Valtteri. If you've got, Charles and Sainz is good, and Max and Perez is good. But Max and Charles would not be good. Max and George would not be good. And it's pretty easy to read. And the teams that consistently do well usually have that as one of their, catchwords that you always have. You never mix it up. McLaren, what were McLaren thinking? Lando, Ricciardo, very good team. Very, very good team. Lando, Piastri. Piastri's quicker. It's going to unsettle Lando for sure. And it's an imbalanced team now. Maybe the future of McLaren is Piastri, and it's Piastri and I don't know who, number 2 driver, and Lando's going to leave. It's sad. They're not getting the best from Lando now. But I totally agree with you, 100%. Sarosh Soman. Hi, Peter. Greetings from India. Big fan of your work. Thank you. Interested to know your thoughts on comparison between Kimi at his prime with Max, Lewis, Charles. Yeah, very good question. Kimi had Perez's traction control foot. He was one of the very, very best in that area, and that was his greatest thing. But he was also incredibly supple and compliant in the way he drove. Short corners, definitely. All feel. Very little studying of telemetry here. Just all feel. And not a massively late breaker, but not as, I would say, didn't break as late as Mika Hakkinen, but he was just about Max, I would say, in that period. Very short period, that's the trouble. But if when Montoya was there, it was interesting how Montoya's longer corners and feel for oversteer was 3/10 on average, 2/10 slower than Kimi. And Montoya was quick. He was a quick racing driver, and Kimi was just all over him. But then it went away, and for various reasons that we shouldn't go into. But I'd put him up there with Max, and therefore with Lewis and Charles. Yeah, definitely. He was really, really good. Mika, different driver, but I'd also put him in his own way up there with them. M.A. Khan. Piastri said he's been studying Max and his lines. He said he learned a lot when following him in the wet and on worn mediums. What would he have learned? This is a great attitude for a young driver. It is a great attitude. And, to watch other drivers is so logical and so obvious that you would think that they would all be doing it, but they're not. And that's a very, very important thing that you're saying there about Piastri, because You know, he's this sort of laconic Australian, doesn't say much. He's fairly calm and quiet. And it's pretty typical of a guy like that he would go out and open his eyes and watch. And I'll never forget standing on the bank at Interlagos, and it was Michael's last year. It was basically Michael's last race, I think. Second last race, something like that, in the Ferrari. And Christian Klein wasn't racing, and he was standing there as well. And I remember watching him, and he had his back to the action for about 40 minutes. And this was Michael's last, it was the last time he was ever going to see Michael in a Ferrari. And I just thought, a young guy, you can be watching Michael Schumacher into one of the most demanding corners in Formula One, that double apex uphill right. And he wasn't watching it at all. And I think it's very, does Yuki Tsunoda watch other drivers and learn from them? Does Nick De Vries? Does Guan Yu Zhou? I don't think they do. I think the younger generation are so wrapped up in the briefcase element of Formula One, of walking in with the backpack and the computer and the engineer with the telemetry. They never watch. And you see it now. You know, if I was an F2 or an F3 driver, I'd be out watching Formula One practice in really strategic places. But they never do. They never watch. They just sit there and look at the times maybe, and that's about it. You never see the younger drivers out on track watching the F1 guys. Never. And I remember thinking that when I went to Kirpen once to watch Michael racing karts. And I went there just purely because I wanted to see I knew I was going to see more of Michael in a kart than I would in a Formula One car. I was going to see his feet, I was going to see his hands, I was going to see his arms, I was going to see all his body language. So I just wanted to see that. And I was amazed that it was wet. And everybody else, when Michael was out, the people who weren't involved with running at the time when he was running were all in the coffee shop or something, doing something else. All these young kids weren't watching Michael Schumacher. I couldn't believe it. And to me, that's just sheer ignorance, really, isn't it? I don't know what it is. It's arrogance, is it, maybe, as well? That they just don't think of learning from somebody else. And the fact that Piastri has shorter corners now than Lando Norris, I wouldn't be surprised if that's because he's been watching Max and see what Max does. And it's not just lines, as I say. It's easy to be on a different line and go slowly in order to be on that line. But it's another thing to be quicker than the guy who's on the perfect geometric line, but shortening the corner. It's an unbelievably difficult thing to do. And if Piastri's twigged that and he's starting to work on that, then, good luck. Lando Norris is all I can say, because then he's definitely going in the right direction. Well, he is anyway. I've said already since the start of the year, Piastri definitely has shorter corners than Lando Norris. So there you go. That's exactly why it is. And the fact that he looks at him on worn mediums. I wonder if he looked at Perez when he was on cold wets in Monaco. Probably all thinking, don't tell me you got to use those next time it's wet. Kartik Kaushik. Hi, Peter. Do you think Carlos Sainz is underrated? He's consistently shown he has the pace to match some incredibly fast teammates. Well, as I said, these underrated word, I don't know what standards you rate him or not rate him. And I can't, because, I don't know what other people say about him. I've no idea. But I've never said anything other than that. He is very fast, very good car control, but long corners and quite aggressive inputs. I think he's softened his inputs quite a lot this year, and I think he's found a zone of consistency, generally speaking. Monaco FP2 aside, back end of FP2 aside, where he is able to get into a groove, and he's very, very quick, but he's never going to be able to go that little bit quicker under pressure at the end of a Q3 or a Q2, because he doesn't have short corners and he doesn't have the stable platform that a Max or a Charles has when Charles doing his job correctly. Quite recently, he hasn't been, I don't think, but if you take Max as a sort of baseline, then Max has this ability to go that little bit extra because he's got this much wider palette of colours that he can use to paint the picture when he gets in the corner. Whereas Carlos, the way he drives, he's very restricted to what he does well, which is brake late, get on the power as soon as he can, good car control, probably very good eyesight, reflexes, balance, but that's it. That's the sum total of what he does really well, and he's got nothing else on which to go. And that's the issue with drivers like Carlos, but it's not to detract from them, because they are, it's great to have him, and it's brilliant that he's there and he plays a great role, and he's going to win more races for sure. Absolutely. And right now, you could argue he's doing a better job than Charles Leclerc. M.A. Khan. Max's stint on the mediums was phenomenal. Why is Max so quick in the wet? He stands out amongst his peers like Senna and Michael did in wet conditions. Is there a driver trait they have in common? Well, I've talked about that, but I will repeat it. I think if you've got all the fundamentals as good as they are with Max, supple inputs, the rate of input is perfect, the platform he creates is perfect. It's not perfect. It's as stable as it can be, given whatever corner he's on, or the nature of the track surface at that given moment, or all the things that the car may or may not be doing well. He creates the best possible platform to enter the corner, and then he makes the corner as short as possible, and he's always feeling the surface of the road in a very comfortable way, because everything's very calm. And as a result of that, he then can feel where the grip is more than most, who are right on the edge and a bit reflexy, and the heart rate's going up. And that's why he's so good in the wet. If you've got all those fundamentals correct, you then feel where the grip is. You don't fall in the trap of braking too late, and you just drive the car to the grip level you're given. I think I banged the mic thing here, and it banged the camera. Sorry, I was getting a bit carried away. And that's why. It's not that he's good in the wet. It's and all great Grand Prix drivers will be or were good in the wet. There's no doubt about that. And some may say they don't enjoy the wet, but all good Grand Prix drivers were good in the wet. Doesn't mean to say that all guys who go well in the wet necessarily are always going to be good in the dry. I think it does now. I don't think it did back then, when tyres could be used for a lot longer, and you could drive in the wet in a quite oversteery way and get away with it and be quick. But then that would then translate to the dry to some extent. But it all comes down, I know this is a long time ago, but I will bring it to life so that it sounds like it happened yesterday. But the 73 British Grand Prix, Ronnie Peterson was basically unbeatable in the Lotus 72. And it was a very, very nice handling car, set up a bit like Fernando Alonso's Aston Martin now, a little bit of oversteer. And Ronnie was just brilliant in the way he was using that oversteer. But then back into the race, somebody's engine blew up, and there was massive oil for about 5 corners, and Ronnie had a couple of really big moments on opposite lock, and as a result of that, he didn't have anything else that he could use in his repertoire other than just to slow down a bit. And Peter Revson in the McLaren, who did have a more stable platform than Ronnie, and did have slightly shorter corners, and did do things not as well as Max for sure, but along that way, just breezed past Ronnie and won the race, because he was the track was just as slippery as it was for him as it was for Ronnie. They're both on the same tyres, but Peter was just able with that. He was able to feel the grip more. He was able to go offline slightly, get the car as stable as it needed to be, and just blew past Ronnie. And that was a really classic example of a driver who is of stability and rate of input. In other words, that what you're doing to the steering is exactly what the car needs at that moment. It's not not only the amount of opposite lock or positive lock, it's the rate at which you're applying it is exactly the rate at which the car is moving. And it may be unbelievably fast for a millisecond. It's so fast that you would never see it on telemetry or on the camera. But it's nonetheless a rate of inputs that's perfectly commensurate with what the car is requiring at that specific millisecond. And that is what it's all about. It's all about those milliseconds. And that's why you could say, how could Max find 3/10 in one sector of Monaco? Because it's all these tiny, tiny, imperceptible inputs, managing all these different weights, which he does so well. And that's why he was so good in so many showcases at Monaco, on full tanks, in the slicks, and when it started to the car got lighter, he was really good. When the graining came in, he was really good. He drove around the graining, and then when the rain came, as distinct from the graining, he was unbelievably good. And he came in for intermediates exactly the right moment. He just showed his talent in the first 2 or 3 laps when it was a bit greasy, a few bits of rain on the visor, and then straight in. Perfect. 1 stop. Fernando, 2 stops. Anthony Virtue. Hi, Peter. Fantastic videos, chats, great insight, unbiased, and extremely interesting. Thank you. Thank you. I'm interested you say unbiased, because one of my great mentors was Dennis Jenkinson, who said that objective journalism is unbelievably boring and nobody should ever be guilty of boredom. So I always actually thought myself, I'm probably being a bit subjective or biased here. And I think a lot of my peers always feel that I am or was. Certainly in the days of Carlos or Nigel, they probably thought that. But even then, I always thought I was trying to be objective as I could. And I think now I probably am biased because I like, the people that do things really well, I'm attracted to and love to see them perform and talk about. So in that sense, I am biased, but I'm not biased in the sense that, because this driver comes from this country or he drives for this team or because he's a good bloke or he's married to this woman, he can do no wrong. I'm not biased in that sense, obviously, but thank you very much for your comment. I know it was well meant. Thank you. Bogby Pogby. That's a good name. Hi, Peter. Thanks for continuing to do these streams. Curious if you're aware of any young drivers not yet in Formula 2 that look to be Formula 1 stars of the future. Antonelli, for example. Yeah, I mean, the F3 race looked pretty good, didn't it? Quite impressed with Luke Browning, the UK young Englishman driving for High Tech. Mind you, he got beaten by Gabriele Mini, his teammate. And young Montoya's doing quite well too. He went pretty well at Monaco. He looks to be on a pretty rising, steeply rising graph of performance. I'm a big Liam Lawson fan. I saw he won a race in Super Formula. He's in Japan now, so he's off everybody's radar, but not easy there. And he won a race there recently, and I really rate Liam Lawson. Yeah, I mean, some very good F2 guys. Iwasa's very good, isn't he? Théo Pourchaire, Frederick Vesti, I've already spoken about. A lot of good guys still on the edge of Formula One. Whether they will get the opportunity, I don't know. And Mini looks pretty good. Looks very good. So yeah, lots of good drivers. Ultimately, it's all going to come down to 1 or 2 of them might get a really lucky break and get a drive on merit. Most of them are going to have to find the 20 million to get into Formula One, and that's going to be the biggest problem, sadly. Tian van Straten. Peter, you're the best. Thank you very much. You said Van Straten, not Van der Straten of VDS Racing, I wonder. Interesting Belgian team. Teddy Paulette won a lot of races with. Ezra S. Hello, Peter. One guy on YouTube named Formula Addict showed on-track simulation based on real telemetry. In one of his podcasts, he showed exactly what your great mind told about Max and how Max had gained in Rascasse. Oh, that's interesting. Thank you very much. Not sure I got a great mind, but anyway, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff out there now. There's a lot of people starting to do telemetry and doing a lot with sector times, and I counsel everyone to have a look at that. It's really interesting. For my part, I tend not to get too involved with that because I find it takes so much time that I don't have enough time to actually watch what's going on. And usually you can tell what's going on by watching, I find. Simple. So I that's what I do really. I just watch and observe and then try to form conclusions as to what I'm seeing based on the evidence and try not to jump to any conclusions that aren't logical. So it's interesting that that's what that showed up. I mean, because there is no way he could have found 3/10 through the entry to the swimming pool. If you were to sit next to Max Verstappen as he was driving a Aston Martin Valkyrie, if that's what it's called, into the swimming pool, it would absolutely blow your mind. You'd think there is no way we can come out of this corner in one piece. But if you do the same thing with Charles Leclerc or Lewis Hamilton, George Russell, you'd feel the same way. You see my point? It is super quick there, and it's very impressive bit of road, but everybody is so good in Formula One, and the cars are all pretty good, that they're all on soft Pirellis going to be much of a muchness through there. Obviously, the Red Bull's going to be a bit more downforce, and it's going to be a little bit quicker, but it's not going to be 0.3 quicker. And if it does have a slight advantage, it's not really going to be able to show that slight advantage in that tiny, tiny little bit of straight before they have to hit the brakes hard for the right-hander and then the left. So there's no way that he's going to find 0.3 through there. And out of the chicane, yes, he might have found a little bit on traction, but it's such a curby chicane that by the time anybody, including Perez, has got the car reasonably straight, you're just accelerating and you're going through the left before Rascasse. So it has to be that section of there. It has to be that very fast left-hander where they're suddenly braking in the middle and then going into the right for Rascasse. And it has to be that section. And so I was lucky because I'd been out watching exactly that in FP2. And that's where I got the pictures of what everyone was doing. And that's when I suddenly saw, wow, look what Max is doing compared with Fernando, compared with Perez. And it was just amazing. And I'll give you, I don't want to give too much away because I've got other comparisons, but I think you'll all be a bit shocked. Well, I was shocked anyway. I'll tell you a little bit. I was a bit shocked with George and Lewis. George has got the shorter corner. And I'm beginning to think, there was a couple of live streams ago, somebody said, I think it was Mark Hughes was saying, Lewis has never had short corners. I think it was that, or maybe he's late breaker or something. And I said, no. And the Lewis I've always known is short corner, is very soft and supple. And he didn't look like that at Monaco, to me, where I was watching at all. And I wonder whether it's the additional anti-dive in that car is something that is really thrown both drivers. 'Cause I saw George said a couple of times the car was terrible in sector 3, which can only mean really Rascasse, I think. And he was definitely he's definitely shorter corner than Lewis, but he wasn't that quick. So quite what that means, I don't think we should read too much into it really. I'm still going to give Lewis the benefit of the doubt, definitely. Formula Addict, anyway, he's the one showing this on-track simulation, so anybody wants to look at that, go for it. M.A. Khan again. Jolyon Palmer said the Max Q3 lap was the best he's ever seen at Monaco. Your knowledge and memory go further back than most. Can you think of similar laps by previous greats? Well, obviously the Senna pole in, was it 88? Was pretty memorable. Before we do that, it's interesting. I'm interested to know what Jolyon Palmer, whether he's talking about the time and the moment and doing it the way he did in Sector 3 looked impressive, or whether he actually saw something on the lap that was the best he'd ever seen at Monaco. And if so, what was that? That's what I'd be interested to know. Because Sector 1, he wasn't that good, was he? He was pretty conservative, and I said, I suspected that's in the back of your mind. Your teammates just had the big one into Sander Vogt, so you're probably going to be slightly off in that section. And then I think top of the hill, he was about the same as Fernando, even though Fernando overall was quicker. I think given his exit from Sander Vogt, it was probably added up to being about the same. And then down through the twiddly bit, he was about the same, little bit off Fernando. I think the Aston was possibly slightly more chuckable through there. That's the right word. But then, then he picked up the speed. But so what I'm saying is there was nothing until you get to back where you'd thought, wow, that's impressive what Max is doing. He just looked slightly as if he was slightly under the edge, I thought, for the first 2/3 of the lap. And the last third wasn't impressive in terms of what he made the car look. It was impressive by how he made the car didn't look, if you see what I mean. Everything was just unbelievably stable and perfectly linear. But if Jolyon saw that before he saw the lap time, then I'm really impressed. Because you blink and you missed it. Annoying rat, this one. Hello, Peter. Did you see Checo's championship comments again? No, I didn't actually. No. What's he say? I imagine he said, I certainly blew it at Monaco. It's going to be an uphill battle now. That's what I imagine he would have said. If he said anything other than that, then he's going to be in trouble, I think. Sebastian Simeon. Hi, Peter. Scott Mansell, in his video about Max, claims that Max's lines are square with late apices so as to straighten the car early, get the best possible exit. It sounds so foreign to what is actually happening that I can't even comment. Is square, what is it? Square with late apices. Late apexes. Does he talk about geometric apex? Or what is he talking about? His turn-in point is short corners everywhere, and his rotation point is usually a meter earlier than Sergio Perez's. He does get the car unbelievably straight early because he does such a good job with rotation. So I would say he's got the last bit right and the first two bits wrong. That's all I can say. But I don't know. It sounds so complicated to me. I don't understand what he's on about, really. I'm saying that in a dismissive way. Scott Mansell, I think, is a very good Formula 4 driver at one point, I think. I met him at Brands a couple of times. Nice guy. Very nice guy. But it just doesn't sound as if he's been watching Formula 1. How can he say that his lines are square? What does that mean? I don't even know what a square line looks like. Sorry. Brian Ferguson. Hi, Peter from Canada. Love your analysis. Thank you. Patron F1. Max Godstappen. Okay. Go V pace. Oh, I haven't talked about the Indy 500. What about the Indy 500 then? There's Zach Brown, all looking good. In the space of about 3 minutes, all three cars are in trouble in the wall or whatever. Talk about the whole thing crumbling around you. I was rooting like crazy for Joseph Newgarden to win that race, and I'm so glad he did. Great guy. A lot of time for Joseph. And the way he carries himself, just the general demeanour of Joseph Newgarden, very, very good driver as well. And as for Marcus Ericsson moaning afterwards about, it was on cold tyres, as if nobody else was on cold tyres at the restart, the final restart, and Rossi was his usual, perplexed self. No, good winner. I'm very disappointed for Felix Rosenqvist, though. What was that all about? You've been around long enough to know the effect of being passed has on your downforce, and why wouldn't he have known that and predicted that before he hit the wall, the back end of the race? He had the best car, I thought, and he had the best chance to win, and it all ended in the wall. Terrible. Palmer Monson. Peter, always a pleasure. What are your thoughts on Stroll at Aston? Seems to be as though his weak performance could give second in the constructors to Mercedes. I hadn't thought about that. I don't think that's what Lawrence Stroll is thinking about. I think Lawrence Stroll is thinking about, why is my son not looking good alongside Fernando Alonso? I don't think he worries about what it's doing for the points against Merck. But I've talked about, how I think I'm only guessing now, but I would think Lawrence Stroll is saying that enough's enough. We've got to get my son up there now. What is going on? And my prediction is that they're going to give him a bit more understeer probably around Barcelona, just to see if they can get rid of some of that Fernando-esque oversteer, and he'll be quite quick as a result. If he's got a bit of understeer, he'll be all right. I don't think Fernando's got any understeer in that car at all. And fairness to the team, they've spent so long, as I say, trying to get grip, as much grip as they can possibly get front and rear, obviously within the realms of having a balanced car, that they haven't spent a lot of time in their history of taking grip out of the car, because it takes so hard to find in the first place, if you see what I mean. But here they are. They've got a great racing car. Now they can do that, and they are. I'm sure that's what they will do. If you want to stop the floaty rear, you'd take a bit of front out, don't you? Joe Code. It's crazy how drivers are only ever given any credit if they have slow teammates. Is that true? I'm not quite sure what that means. Well, Nigel Mansell was given a massive amount of credit with fast teammates. Well, I did. I gave him a massive amount of credit anyway. So, yeah. I think what you're saying is, I don't know. I don't know what you're saying, really, Joe. I think you need to expand on that. When you say it's crazy how drivers are only given credit if they have slow teammates. Maybe you're talking about Lewis here. Lewis has not been given a lot of credit. Now he's got a fast teammate. Maybe that's what you're saying. Yeah, maybe. I mean, all I've said is George is fast, and Lewis knows he's fast, and he's known that from day one, and he's quicker than Valtteri Bottas, and that's what you don't need. That's what Nigel Mansell didn't want when he went back to Williams in 90. He said to Frank, I don't want Alan Prost, I want Riccardo Patrese, who was perfect, absolutely perfect. He was very quick enough to win Grand Prix, but not quick enough to annoy Nigel. And it's this annoyance factor more than anything, because you're not then getting the best from your superstar number one. M.A. Khan, you were the first person, Peter, to identify Max as an early breaker, early turn-in. Commentators said he was a late breaker and super aggressive. Now we're seeing drivers and media change their view. Yeah, well, they say he's late breaker and super aggressive because that's how they perceive him to be, because his old man is a bit rough and ready, and Max is a bit, a tough Dutchman, and, he's got a swagger about him, so he must be a late breaker. He must be aggressive. And then he has the odd incident on track. Oh, yeah, he's aggressive. Got to be a late breaker. Well, they're not watching. And even now, nobody watches. And where I was watching at Monaco to do those shots where you could see what you could see there in Technicolor right in front of you, the big differences between all the drivers. And I did that partly because a few of the viewers have said, what are you watching, Peter? How do you see these differences? And this is a good example. That was one place where you could see it. Nobody else was there. There was one lady taking pictures with a mobile phone, and there was one photographer on the balcony outside. A few times I caught his legs rather than the cars. But that was about it, because nobody thought it was an interesting vantage point. It wasn't a photographically beautiful place to be, unless you were actually on the balcony. And even then, there was only one photographer. And everybody else in the media centre, not to decry them, because I'm sure they're all doing their own thing, were all sitting there with laptops, looking at the TV screens, which were showing the times, the world feed, action pictures, a couple of other screens, which I didn't really understand. And none of them were watching the action at all. And I'm sure it's the same in the pits. They go over they're in the garages there at Monaco, above the pit lane, and they're watching the cars coming in and out of the pit lane. They can see a little bit of the cars, the top of the helmets of the drivers as they're coming out of the chicane after the back end of the swimming pool section along that straight. They can't actually see the entry to that. They certainly can't see the fast bit. And on the other side, they can just see the car going past them. They don't actually see the exit of the last corner. And that's it. And none of the team people, and I was around quite a lot, I never saw any team people out on the track watching. None. I saw a driver watching, now I know. Oscar Piastri was watching Max Verstappen. 100% for that. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's extraordinary to me. Somebody can say to me that Max has a late apex. They're obviously not watching. A, and B, if somebody says Max is a late breaker, they're obviously not watching. So, end of story. And let's get that Max is not a late breaker. Max will brake as late as he knows the car can take in order to have the platform he needs to have a very short early entry and to manipulate the car at exactly the rotation point he wants, which 9 times out of 10 is going to be well before the geometrical apex. And that's where he breaks. So it's actually unfair to Max to say if he's a late breaker or an earlier breaker. What you should say is he's a correct breaker. That's my view. But yeah, compared with all the graphics that they love to put up, who's braking later here, 50 centimeters later break. Yeah, by the law of averages, he's probably quite an early breaker compared with a lot of them who just do nothing other than brake as late as they possibly can without actually crashing, because that's got to be the way to be fast into a corner. One day the penny will drop, one hopes. Karma in Babylon. Kimi came... Oh, she's replying to Sarah. Karma in Babylon's replying to Sarun. Kimi came pretty close to winning the 2003 title in a car that was on balance third best. Did he? Yeah, he's very good. Isn't this supposed to be live now? Late. Yeah, it is live. but it's not going to be live too much longer because it's nearly 10 o'clock and I've got to go to bed. Patience is a virtue. Tom Bow, show up late as usual. Pantro F1. Did you see Perez still clinging onto his championship hopes? The man is delusional. Yeah, but it shouldn't take a race like Monaco for people to realise that he's not really going to beat Max Verstappen. You realise that when you go out on the circuit, on most corners, anywhere in the world, and you watch him. Okay, if he'd come down from Mars and you'd only watched Sector 1 and Baku, you would have thought, whoa, who is this guy? But there aren't many Sector 1s in Baku in Formula 1, sadly. Possibly sadly. And so if you watch Max anywhere else, you'd think, yeah, this guy's in another class. Ian Diloff. Hi, Peter. Do you think Mercedes can do better compared with Monaco and past races with the new parts in Barcelona, given the characteristics of the track? I wish I knew. I mean, I just don't know. I mean, there was one weird pattern which I've touched upon where George said the car was really good in Sector 1, but by the time he got to Sector 3, it was terrible. What does that mean? Does it mean the tyres were going off, or there was some peculiarity about Sector 3 that wasn't there in Sector 1? I suppose you could say if Sector 3 is dominated by the entry to Rascasse, and it's all about loading the car, getting the stable platform, getting the early turn in, getting the feel from the car, all the things you need, then that shouldn't be too much of an issue around Barcelona. And I would have thought Barcelona is a bit more like Sector 1 of Monaco, where they seem to be pretty good. So on that basis, which is a pretty flaky, line of thinking, because I'm just not sure what was going on at Mercedes with all that funny stuff where they were really quick in Sector 1 and slow in Sector 3. Because that's an unknown, really. It's difficult to say. But if you wanted to use that as an extrapolation, you could say, yeah, they should go. On that basis, we predict that we'll go quite well. I mean, I'm saying it in that funny tone of voice because quite often you have these teams that, in the preview says, oh, we're really looking forward to Barcelona. Lovely combination of corners, long straights. Great to be in Spain. We love the Spanish fans. The weather's always pretty good. Love to be there eating the paella. The drivers are looking forward to it. We've got really good upgrades on the car. It's going to be brilliant. And then they have a terrible weekend. And then you read the press release on Sunday night and it says, well, it's about where we thought we'd be. We didn't think we'd go that well in Barcelona. It's not really suiting our car that well. I mean, and you just think, what is all this rubbish? And so anyway, trying to put all that to one side, it's almost inconceivable. As I said, I think to me the big race is the definitive thing, really, to some extent, defining the next few races will be how the Mercedes compares with the Aston Martin this weekend around Barcelona. 2 unbelievably quick drivers in the Merc, 1.5 pretty quick drivers in the Aston Martin, or one very quick and the other one sort of semi-quick. But he might go better because of the understeer, which I think they might dial into his car, I suspect, and an Aston Martin which is well understood now. It's done a lot of miles, and it's a car that gives Fernando a lot of confidence, whereas the Mercedes is not a car that yet will instill a massive amount of confidence because it's such a new form that in which we find it. So on that basis, the Aston should be quicker, but I'm saying all that in the context that I think the Red Bull will be quicker than all of them. I think it's probably on you'd have to say on the way it's going at the moment, probably Aston will be better, but I don't know. I can see George doing it. Mercedes might do something. Let's wait and see. I don't know. Wait and see. It was so confusing at Monaco, what they were doing and how their race went and what it was all about. I mean, they afterwards are saying, oh, unbelievably good pit stops, great strategy, everything was brilliant. The same strategy as everybody else as far as I could see, but anyway, they thought it was great and the car showed a massive amount of promise, so that's good. Let's wait and see. How much do you think the teams learned by seeing the underside of the RB19 after Checo crashed? Not very much, I don't think. I mean, they would have had the old cameras and they will be doing the freeze frames and everything else, but excuse me, as I said, it's not just that. And it's not as if everybody's been desperate to see what's the floor of the Red Bull. As soon as they know it, everybody's going to be able to go racing. You wait and see. Won't change anything. And if it does change it, Adrian will just put a different floor on. Joe Code. Why do people assume the Mercedes is the third, fourth fastest car when they have the faster drivers? Could easily be the same pace as the Alpine, but the drivers make it look 2/10 faster. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good point. I mean, we underestimate the effect of good drivers, not necessarily on a race-by-race basis, but as I've said a few times, excuse me, on this live stream, that if if AlphaTauri had started the year with Max Verstappen and George Russell, they would be further up the grid consistently at every race. Not only because they're quicker drivers, but because they'll make the car quicker. Because it's very easy to go around in circles if you don't have a driver who's absolutely on the physical Max Verstappen stable platform short corner limit. If you have a driver who's 10/10 flat out, can't go any quicker, but if Max was in that car, he'd be 3/10 quicker or 2/10 quicker or 1/10 quicker, then the engineers are going to go around in circles in terms of how they develop the car. Nothing's changed in Formula One. It's always been that way. And for all the modern technique of designing and running a car, that is the big flaw in everything, the drivers. And if the driver is consistently using long corners and braking too late to have the platform that he needs in order to do what Max Verstappen does in a corner, then that car will always suffer technically, and the engineers will have no ability to do anything about that, because I say that because none of them seem to have any clue about what their drivers do anyway in terms of style. They don't seem to say, oh yeah, well, we know that actually Lando would be quicker if he had shorter corners to the tune of 0.1 around Silverstone, and we've taken that into account in the development of the car. But because he doesn't have longer corners, obviously it's not going to show up. They never say that, do they? They just assume that what Lando does in the car is the limit of the car, because they have to. That's the way Formula One is. Believe in it. We're family. We win and lose together. Chris Coulter, hey family, that's where. How is everyone doing? You talking about my family or your family, Chris? I think the family watching this, I think, is the real answer. My family? Well, Dexter. I wonder if I can do this without messing it up too much. Where is he? Just the others. Can you see him there? Look at him. Yes, it's you, Dexter, we're talking about. He's just rolled over on his back now, fast asleep. It's delayed when I watch it here, so I'm going to see if you actually could see Dexter then or not. Got lots of rubbish on my desk. Oh no, I went the wrong way with it, did I? I went completely the wrong way. What am I doing? Why did that happen? Let's try it again. I can't do, I've got this thing here taped on. Let me get rid of that. Why is that not showing Dexter? No, let's see what we're doing here. Floor? Door. One. Dexter. There you go. That was him. Got it. Got him. Now look, he's going out now. He thinks somebody's been calling him. Ah, Dex. So there we go. I'm going to have to wind this up, guys. So sorry. Going to do another one pretty soon. It's a bit rushed, isn't it, all this double header business? There you go. There he is. Just watching him now on the replay here. Boom Shaker Boom says, hi Pete. Boom Shanker. Boom, hi Pete. Alonso smoked too much. Alonso's sure getting the most out of the Aston Martin. Yeah, he is. He is. He's doing pretty well with the Aston Martin. I wonder what Sebastian Vettel thinks about it this year. Wish I hadn't retired. I think Dplay Station Form is replying to, it's an it's an intra-channel chat. Aaron Taylor says, Ferrari upgrades look decent. Good. Let's hope they go well. Love to see that. Paul Anthony Nelson, 4 a.m. here. This race fan business is hard work. Paul, that's probably about 6 now from when you wrote that, sadly. Sorry. Yeah, anyway, Dr. Fistness, yeah. So much going on. Sorry, guys. I'm going to have to... Don't forget to like the video, somebody said. Well, that's very nice. Thank you. Hamilton fans are still crying. Ted Kravitz has no play. Oh, Ted Kravitz. Good guy, Ted, isn't he? I think so. I knew him when he was at ITV. He was a sort of technical guy, and then he's done a good job since then. I think he takes life pretty seriously. Phil Francis says, hit the like button, folks. Oh, to thank Peter. Oh, thank you very much for doing all that. Yeah, I thought you were saying button. I think a Jensen button. I was with Jensen over the weekend at Monaco. He's in quite good form. Actually, one thing I really loved was Mark Webber talking about Monaco. I was with a group of guests at Rolex, and I was interviewing Mark really for the guests, and we were talking about the barriers and the lap. You know, shouldn't underplay Mark's record at Monaco. It's pretty good around Monaco. Formula 3000 and 2 F1 wins. And he said that when he was doing a pole lap, or in general, he tried to imagine the Monaco lap with just white lines on the corners and no barriers. Interesting, eh? I've never heard that before. I think that's quite a cool... He should... Well, I'm sure he's told Oscar Piastri that. It seemed to work for Oscar, didn't he? Went very well. Any update on Kyalami, BNNT? I'll make this the last one, and thank you so much, everybody. Update on Kyalami. I was eavesdropping. I'm actually... What do you call it? Photobombed, except there was no camera. A conversation between Dieter Renken, one of my mates who's South African, very, very well informed politically, Formula One journalist, and 2 key sponsorship guys at McLaren in the McLaren motorhome, and they were grilling Dieter on the prospects of a South African Grand Prix. And I think from what I got, the message was there were a lot of dramas, but there was like a 70% chance that it might happen. I think if I'm wrong, it's, you know, Dieter will correct me, I'm sure, but I think that was the gist of the conclusion that I drew anyway, that it was about a 70% chance that it would happen. So there you go. So I'm going to finish this. I'll say one. Okay. Stephen Greensit Black says, hi Peter, put Lewis or Fernando in the Red Bull and Max in the Mercedes or Aston. Does Max qualify on pole, or do Lewis and Alonso put the Red Bull on pole? Well, it's a good question to go to bed with tonight, isn't it? I don't know. I think right now, I think Max would get such a shock driving anything other than a Red Bull. He'd probably think, what is this? Whereas Lewis would probably think, oh, Nirvana, I'm finally in a racing car again, and be brilliant. And Fernando he'd be trying so hard to show that he should have been the Red Bull driver that he might make a mistake. So I think probably, against all odds, I'd give the nod to Lewis there, only because, you know, it's just one-offs. So anyway, lots going on here. So many different comments. Thank you so much, everyone. I've been talking. My wife's getting a bit antsy. No, she's not. She's fine. Dexter's gone to bed. That's one thing. So yeah, I think we'd better call it a day there. So thank you so much, everyone. For this, I'll be doing the usual videos. First one tomorrow, Friday, once we've seen the action from Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then I'll do some more live streams next week going forward. I've got a massive break for the Canadian Grand Prix. That'd be good, wouldn't it? 2 weeks. Seems like a huge time. Was the, it's what it used to be in the old days. So there we are. I'm just looking at the new edit thing here, just to see if that's all under control. So, yeah, good. Thanks for watching. Thank you to Pitbox and to Jetcraft, who've been very supportive and are very supportive of this channel. Descriptions about both companies in the video. Jetcraft, the great company, a lot of presence at Monaco as well. Shame that Jack Doohan had that shunt at the top of the hill in the F2 race, but his day will come, and he's very, very fast racing driver, and we'll see him do well. And as for Pitbox, there's upgrades and new stuff coming all the time. So go to pitboxio.com. Really interesting company in terms of if you've got any involvement in track days or club racing or national racing or racing of any sort, have a look at Pitbox. They'll do a really good job in terms of, what's the right word? Accumulation of data and making it easy to read and make sense of. There you go. Anyway, thanks to both of them, and thanks to you all for watching and supporting. See you very soon, and stay safe.